Welcome to Shadow Frames, where we uncover the stories hidden in the shadows of forgotten images. Today, we're going to explore a mysterious photograph from 1913 that has left many viewers disturbed and unsettled. A seemingly innocent family portrait at the beach that reveals something unnatural when you look more closely at the sun's shadow. Newport, Rhode Island, summer of 1913. The Wright brothers' first flight was still fresh in the public's imagination. The Titanic disaster had shocked the world just a year prior, and World War I was still lurking beyond the horizon, unforeseen by the carefree vacationers enjoying the last golden days of the Belle Epoque. Among these vacationers was the Caldwell family. Henry Caldwell, a successful banker from Boston, his wife Eleanor, their 16-year-old daughter Margaret, and their 10-year-old son Thomas. The Caldwells were the picture of upper-middle-class prosperity, summering at their vacation cottage near Bailey's Beach, where the elite of New England society gathered to escape the sweltering city heat. On July 17, 1913, the family decided to have their photograph taken on the beach. Photography was still something of a special occasion then. Cameras were expensive, and having a family portrait taken required planning and the services of a professional. The Caldwells hired a local photographer named Joseph Harrington, who had established quite a reputation among the Newport summer residents. It was a glorious summer day. The women wore their long white cotton dresses that reached their ankles, with wide-brimmed hats to protect their fair complexions from the sun. Henry Caldwell sported a straw boater hat and a light linen suit, while young Thomas wore knee-length shorts with a sailor-style top, the fashion for boys at the time. Harrington set up his large box camera on a wooden tripod, ducking under the black cloth to compose the shot. The family arranged themselves naturally on the sand, Henry standing proud with his hand on Eleanor's shoulder as she sat in a wicker beach chair. Margaret stood on her father's other side, and Thomas sat cross-legged on a small blanket at his mother's feet. "Hold very still now," Harrington would have instructed. In those days, exposure times were longer than today's instant snapshots. The family had to maintain their positions for several seconds. Smiling was discouraged, as it was difficult to hold a natural smile for that long. The photograph was developed and printed, and the Caldwells were delighted with the result. It captured their summer perfectly. The elegant poses, the fashionable attire, the slight breeze evident in Eleanor's and Margaret's dresses. They had the photograph framed and displayed prominently in their Boston home upon their return from Newport. By all accounts, it was a perfectly ordinary family portrait of its time, until 87 years later, when their great-granddaughter, Emily Caldwell, discovered it in an old trunk in her grandmother Margaret's attic. If you're enjoying this story so far, take a moment to hit the subscribe button and join our Shadow Frames family, and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. We love connecting with viewers from around the world. The year was 2000. Emily Caldwell, a 28-year-old archivist at the Boston Historical Society, had been tasked with sorting through her recently deceased grandmother's belongings. Margaret Caldwell had lived to the remarkable age of 103. One of the last living connections to that pre-World War I era. Emily found the trunk in the far corner of the attic beneath piles of old curtains and moth-eaten quilts. Inside were dozens of photographs, letters, and small mementos spanning over a century of Caldwell family history. "I was immediately drawn to this particular beach photograph," Emily would later recall in an interview. "There was something compelling about it. The formal poses contrasted with the casual beach setting, the expressions on their faces. They looked happy, but there was something distant in their eyes, especially the boys. My great-uncle Thomas." Emily took the photograph home, intending to have it professionally cleaned and preserved. She placed it on her desk under her study lamp and began examining it with a magnifying glass, noting details to include in her family archive project. That's when she first noticed something strange about Thomas's shadow. While the shadows of the standing family members stretched behind them as one would expect from the angle of the sun, Thomas's shadow seemed wrong. It didn't align properly with his seated position, and there appeared to be an extra appendage, something like an arm, reaching out from the shadow toward his sister Margaret. "At first I thought it was just a photographic anomaly," Emily said. "Old photographs often have imperfections, scratches, chemical stains, uneven development. But the more I studied it, the more convinced I became that this wasn't a flaw in the photograph. The shadow was too distinct, too intentionally formed." Curious, Emily began researching her great-uncle Thomas, about whom the family rarely spoke. She knew he had died young, but but the circumstances had always been vague. Her grandmother Margaret had always changed the subject when Thomas was mentioned, and eventually, the family simply stopped asking. Emily's research led her to the archives of the Boston Globe. After days of searching through microfilm records, she found a small article dated October 3, 1913, less than 3 months after the beach photograph was taken. Tragedy strikes prominent Boston family. 10-year-old son of banker Henry Caldwell drowns in domestic accident. The article was frustratingly brief, mentioning only that Thomas Caldwell had drowned in the bathtub of the family's Boston home while under the care of his sister. It noted that the police had ruled it an accident, though unusual circumstances were mentioned without elaboration. Emily was puzzled. A 10-year-old drowning in a bathtub was unusual, especially one old enough to bathe himself. And why had her grandmother Margaret never spoken of this? She would have been 16 at the time, old enough to remember such a traumatic event vividly. Emily decided to dig deeper. She contacted the Boston Police Department to request any records they might have from the investigation, though she didn't hold much hope that they'd have preserved files from 1913. To her surprise, she received a call a week later from an Officer Jenkins who sounded hesitant. "Ms. Caldwell, we've located the file you inquired about. It's been in our cold case storage. I'm not supposed to tell you this, but your great-uncle's death wasn't as straightforward as the newspapers reported." Emily felt a chill run through her. "What do you mean?" "The case was never officially closed. There were inconsistencies in the statements given by family members. Your great-grandmother insisted that she heard Thomas speaking to someone in the bathroom before the incident, but there was no one else in the house except your grandmother Margaret, who claimed to have been reading in her bedroom." Emily looked down at the photograph on her desk, at Thomas's misaligned shadow with its reaching arm. "Officer Jenkins, would it be possible for me to see that file? Normally, we wouldn't release it, but given the age of the case and your direct family connection, come by the station tomorrow morning. Ask for me at the front desk. If you're finding this story intriguing, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our uploads. And we'd love to know where you're watching from. Let us know in the comments below." The next morning, Emily found herself in a small conference room at the Boston Police Department. A manila folder labeled Caldwell, TOCT 1913, sitting before her. Officer Jenkins, a kind-faced man in his 50s, sat across from her. "I should warn you, Ms. Caldwell, some of what's in here might be disturbing, especially considering these were your relatives." Emily nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "I understand." She opened the folder. Inside were yellowed papers, some typed, others handwritten in faded ink. The first was the official police report, detailing the scene as the officers found it. Thomas Caldwell, discovered by the family maid, submerged in the bathtub, water cold, indicating he had been there for some time. No signs of struggle. The bathroom door had been locked from the inside, requiring the maid to fetch a key from Mr. Caldwell's study. But it was the witness statements that caught Emily's attention. Eleanor Caldwell, Thomas's mother, had been adamant that she heard Thomas speaking to someone in the bathroom, having what sounded like a conversation, shortly before the maid discovered him. When asked who could have been in there with him, she reportedly became hysterical, claiming, "His shadow. He's been talking to his shadow since we returned from Newport." Margaret's statement was clinically brief. She had been reading in her room. She heard nothing unusual. She had not seen Thomas that morning. Her handwriting was perfect, each letter meticulously formed, betraying no emotion or urgency despite having just lost her younger brother. The investigating detective had noted at the bottom of her statement, "Subject displays unusual calm. Recommend further questioning." But there had been no further questioning documented. The next page was a letter from Henry Caldwell to the police commissioner, dated 2 days after Thomas's death. "Commissioner Sullivan, I trust this letter finds you well. As discussed during our meeting at the Somerset Club yesterday evening, I would consider it a personal favor if the unfortunate matter concerning my son could be concluded with minimal further intrusion upon my family's grief. The considerable donation to the Policeman's Benevolent Fund which I have arranged should express the depth of my gratitude for your discretion in this sensitive time. With highest regards, Henry P. Caldwell." Emily looked up at Officer Jenkins, who was watching her reaction carefully. "He buried it," she said flatly. "My great-grandfather used his influence to stop the investigation." Jenkins nodded. It wasn't uncommon in those days. Wealthy families could manage unfortunate situations to avoid scandal. But why? If it was just an accident, "There's more," Jenkins interrupted, pointing to the folder. "Keep reading." Emily turned to the next document, a report from the medical examiner. Most of it contained technical language, but one passage was underlined in faded red ink. Subject's lungs contain minimal water, inconsistent with drowning as primary cause of death. Marks on neck indicate possible asphyxiation prior to submersion. Peculiar bruising pattern on arms and torso suggests restraint by hands of unusual size or shape. Emily felt sick. Are they saying he was murdered? That someone strangled him and then placed him in the bathtub? Jenkins sighed. That appears to be what the medical examiner suspected. But as you saw, the investigation was halted before any conclusions could be officially drawn. Emily's mind was racing. She thought about her grandmother Margaret, who had lived a quiet, respectable life, eventually marrying a professor from Harvard and raising 3 children. Could she have been involved in her brother's death? And what about Eleanor's strange statement about Thomas talking to his shadow? "There's one more thing you should see," Jenkins said, reaching into the folder and pulling out a small envelope from the very back. This was catalogued as evidence but never formally entered into the record. Inside the envelope was a page torn from what appeared to be a child's journal. The handwriting was messy but legible, clearly that of a young boy. It was dated September 28, 1913, 5 days before Thomas's death. "I don't want to tell Mother because she will be frightened, but my shadow is wrong again. When I move, sometimes it doesn't move the same way. Last night, I woke up and it was standing by my window looking out. Even though I was in bed, I pretended to be asleep. It knows I saw it. Today it whispered that it's tired of being just a shadow. It said soon we can trade places. I don't know what that means, but I am scared. Margaret saw it too, but she told me not to tell anyone or they'll send me away like they did with Cousin Frederick." Emily's hands were trembling as she placed the journal page back in its envelope. "Did they investigate this? Talk to Margaret about what Thomas meant?" Jenkins shook his head. "As far as I can tell from the records, once Mr. Caldwell intervened, all active investigation stopped. The case was technically left open, but effectively abandoned." Emily thanked Officer Jenkins and left the station with photocopies of the file. As she walked to her car, her mind kept returning to the beach photograph, to Thomas's strange shadow with its reaching arm. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at her desk, staring at the photograph under her lamp. Something about the angle of the light made the shadows in the image seem to deepen, to move almost imperceptibly at the corners of her vision. Around 3 a.m., desperate for answers and feeling slightly foolish, Emily decided to try something. She took a scanner she used for her archival work and scanned the photograph at the highest resolution possible. Then she opened the digital image on her computer and began to enhance it, section by section. The family's faces emerged in greater detail. Eleanor's tight smile, Henry's proud stance, Margaret's cold eyes, and Thomas. There was something in his expression that Emily hadn't noticed before. Fear. His smile didn't reach his eyes, which were wide, almost pleading. Emily zoomed in on Thomas's shadow. At normal resolution, it simply looked slightly misaligned, with what could be interpreted as an extra limb. But at this enhanced resolution, details emerged that made Emily's blood run cold. The shadow didn't match Thomas's posture at all. While Thomas sat cross-legged, his shadow appeared to be crouching, as if ready to pounce. The arm she had noticed wasn't an arm at all, but what looked like a tendril or elongated finger stretching toward Margaret. And worst of all, the shadow had a face, not Thomas's face, but something with hollow eyes and what appeared to be a wide, grinning mouth. Emily jerked back from her computer screen, knocking over her coffee mug. As she rushed to clean up the spill before it reached her papers, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. On the back of the photograph, barely visible in faded pencil, was a short message. "It's in the shadow. God forgive me. MC. Margaret Caldwell, her grandmother." For those of you joining us on this dark journey, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Take a second to subscribe to Shadow Frames if you haven't already, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more hidden stories into the light. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial. If her grandmother had known something about Thomas's death, had perhaps even been involved somehow, why leave this cryptic message on the photograph? And why keep the photograph at all? The next morning, Emily called her mother, trying to sound casual. "Mom, did Grandma Margaret ever talk to you about her brother, the one who died when they were children?" A long pause followed. "Why are you asking about that? I found a photograph of him while going through Grandma's things. I'm just curious." Another pause. She didn't like to talk about him. The few times I asked, she would get this faraway look and say only that Thomas was taken by his shadow. I always assumed it was some old-fashioned way of talking about death. You know, like how they used to say someone was taken by consumption when they died of tuberculosis. Did she ever elaborate on what happened? No, but her mother hesitated. There was one time, when I was about 12, I found her in the attic staring at an old photograph. When she saw me, she started crying and said something strange. She said, "I should have helped him fight it. I thought it would take him and leave me alone." I never knew what she meant, and she never spoke of it again. After talking with her mother, Emily decided she needed to learn more about the context surrounding Thomas's death. She spent the next several days at the Boston Historical Society, researching the Caldwell family and the period. She discovered that in the early 1900s, the Caldwells had been not just wealthy, but influential in Boston society. Henry Caldwell's bank had financed much of the city's expansion, and Eleanor came from old New England money. They were the kind of family that could indeed make scandals disappear. Emily also found references to cousin Frederick Whittier, Eleanor's nephew, who had been institutionalized at the McLean Asylum in 1911, 2 years before Thomas's death. His admission record cited delusional behavior and dangerous fixations on shadows and reflections. Most interestingly, Emily uncovered a series of letters between Eleanor Caldwell and a Professor James Blackwood of Miskatonic University in Arkham, Massachusetts. Blackwood appeared to be some kind of specialist in folklore and superstitions. In her letters, Eleanor made vague references to Thomas's condition and asked about shadow legends in New England coastal communities. Blackwood's responses were scholarly but seemed to take Eleanor's concerns seriously. In one letter dated August 30th, 1913, about 6 weeks after the beach photograph was taken, he wrote, "Mrs. Caldwell, regarding your inquiry about the Native American legends of the shadow stealers or skinwalkers along the Rhode Island coast, I have consulted with my colleague Dr. Armitage, who has made extensive study of such matters. The Narragansett tribes indeed had legends of entities they called Manitou Neshkidnami, roughly translated as spirits who wear shadows. These entities were said to attach themselves to a person through their shadow and gradually replace them. Of particular note is the belief that these entities could only complete their replacement if invited, or if the victim's family failed to recognize the gradual changes. The protective rituals you inquired about are unfortunately lost to time, though there are references to the use of certain herbs and salt barriers. As to your specific concerns about your son, I would caution against assuming a supernatural explanation for what may be explicable through modern psychology. However, should you wish to discuss the matter further, I would be willing to visit your home for a more detailed consultation. With regards, Professor J. Blackwood." Emily sat back in her chair, trying to process what she was reading. Had her great-grandmother actually believed that some supernatural entity was attempting to possess or replace Thomas through his shadow? It seemed absurd, yet the letter suggested Eleanor had been concerned enough to research obscure folklore. And then there was the photograph itself, the undeniable strangeness of Thomas's shadow, the fear in his eyes, Margaret's cryptic note on the back. Emily decided she needed to visit Newport, to see the beach where the photograph was taken, to perhaps find some connection or explanation that had eluded her so far. Bailey's Beach had changed since 1913, but not as much as one might expect. It was still an exclusive enclave, and Emily had to use her historical society credentials to gain access for research purposes. Standing on the sand, looking out at the Atlantic, Emily tried to pinpoint the exact location where the photograph had been taken. The distinctive outcropping of rocks visible in the background still existed, allowing her to approximate the spot. As she stood there, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the beach. Emily found herself staring at her own shadow, stretching out before her on the sand. For a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw it move independently, a slight twitch of the shadowy hand that didn't correspond to her own movement. Emily blinked, and her shadow was normal again, just an ordinary silhouette cast by the setting sun. She shook her head, laughing nervously at herself. The story was getting to her, making her imagine things. As she turned to leave, she noticed an elderly man watching her from a nearby bench. He had the weathered look of someone who had spent a lifetime by the sea, his white hair contrasting with his deeply tanned skin. "You're standing where they took it, aren't you?" he called out to her. "The Caldwell photograph." Emily froze. "How did you know?" The man patted the bench beside him, inviting her to sit. "My name is Robert Harrington. My grandfather was Joseph Harrington, the photographer who took that picture in 1913. We're reaching a pivotal moment in our story." If you're enjoying it so far, please hit the subscribe button and join our Shadow Frames community. Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Knowing our viewers are out there in the shadows makes these stories even more meaningful to share. Emily sat down beside Robert Harrington, her heart racing. "How did you know I was looking for information about that photograph?" The old man smiled sadly. "Because you're not the first, and you have the look, the same haunted expression my grandfather had after he developed that film." "What do you mean? Did your grandfather notice something wrong with the photograph?" Robert nodded slowly. "That photograph destroyed him. He was a respected photographer before that, had a thriving business among the Newport summer residents. But after the Caldwell photograph, he became obsessed with it. Kept making prints, examining them under magnifying glasses, writing notes that made no sense." "Notes about what?" "About the boy's shadow, about how he'd never seen anything like it, how it seemed to move between exposures." Robert paused, looking out at the ocean. "My grandfather believed something had attached itself to the boy during the photography session, something from the sea." Emily felt a chill despite the warm evening air. "From the sea?" "This coastline has stories going back centuries. The Native Americans who lived here before the colonists arrived believed certain places were thin boundaries between our world and something else, places where things could cross over, could attach themselves to the living by clinging to their shadows." Emily thought of Professor Blackwood's letter to Eleanor about the Manitou Neshkidnami, the shadow stealers. "Did your grandfather ever speak to the Caldwell family about his concerns?" Robert's face darkened. "He tried. He went to their Boston home in early October 1913, desperate to warn them. That was the day he found out the boy had died. The maid told him, said the family was not receiving visitors. Did he tell anyone else what he suspected? He tried to tell the police, but they dismissed him as a lunatic. After that, he became a recluse. His business failed. He spent the rest of his life researching similar occurrences, similar photographs. He collected dozens of them, all showing people with shadows that didn't quite match, people who later died under mysterious circumstances. Do you still have these photographs? His research?" Emily asked eagerly. Robert shook his head. "After he died, my father burned it all, said it was the ravings of a madman, that it had destroyed our family name." He paused, but he didn't find everything. From his pocket, Robert withdrew a small leather-bound notebook. "My grandfather's journal from 1913. I found it hidden in the frame of his self-portrait when I was cleaning out his studio decades ago." Emily took the journal with trembling hands. "May I?" Robert nodded. "That's why I approached you. I've been coming to this beach for 60 years watching. Occasionally someone comes, stands where you stood, looks out at the water with that same searching expression. The last one was your grandmother about 20 years ago. Margaret came back here. But why? Read the journal. Perhaps you'll understand." Robert stood up stiffly. "I should get home before dark. I don't come to the beach after sunset anymore. Not since I read what's in those pages." As Robert walked away, Emily called after him. "How will I return this to you?" He turned, his expression grave. "Find me here tomorrow, same time. And Ms. Caldwell, don't read that after dark. Some words call things to you." Emily wanted to heed Robert's warning, but her curiosity was too strong. She drove to her hotel, ordered room service, and as the sun set over Newport, she opened Joseph Harrington's journal. The early entries were mundane, records of photography sessions, notes on technique, complaints about difficult clients. But beginning on July 17, 1913, the day of the Caldwell photograph, the tone changed dramatically. "Strangest thing today at Bailey's Beach." The Caldwell session began normally, but as I was setting up, I noticed something odd in my viewfinder. The boy's shadow seemed to ripple, like heat rising from pavement, though the sand around it remained still. Thought it was my imagination, or a fault in the lens. During exposure, felt sudden cold despite the summer heat. The glass plate I was using developed a crack, unusual for quality German glass. When I suggested a second exposure, the boy became agitated, refused to sit again. The mother insisted we continue with a new plate. Developed the photographs this evening. Something is wrong with the boy's shadow. It doesn't match his pose. There appears to be an extension reaching toward the sister. Never seen anything like it in 20 years of photography. Technical error? but the rest of the image is perfectly exposed. The entries continued, growing increasingly disturbed. July 18th. Examined the negative again. The anomaly is in the negative itself, not a flaw in printing. Tried 3 different printing techniques. All show the same distorted shadow. Something caught on the plate that wasn't visible to the naked eye. July 23rd. Dreamt of the beach last night. In the dream, I was setting up my camera, but when I looked through the viewfinder, the Caldwell boy was alone on the beach. His shadow rose up behind him, 3-dimensional, with limbs like smoke wrapping around him. Woke up sweating. Can't shake the image. August 5th. Met old man Whittlesey today, the Narragansett fisherman who sometimes guides for the summer residents. Showed him the Caldwell photograph. His reaction was disturbing. Dropped his pipe, made warding gestures. Said in his broken English, "Shadow too hungry, boy already going, nothing to do now." Refused to explain further. September 10th. The dreams are worse. Now I see the shadow entity clearly. It has a face, if it can be called a face, with hollow sockets where eyes should be and a mouth that opens too wide. In the dreams, it speaks to me in a voice like sand shifting. Says others will come, that this place calls to them, that they have been crossing over for centuries. Says they need vessels, that shadows are their doorways. The entries became more fragmented, interspersed with sketches of symbols that Joseph claimed would protect against the shadow entities. He wrote about researching similar cases, about finding patterns of mysterious deaths following photographs with shadow anomalies dating back to the earliest days of photography. The final entry, dated October 4th, 1913, the day after Thomas's death was reported, was the most disturbing. "It is too late for the Caldwell boy. I went to their home today but was turned away. The maid said he drowned yesterday. I know better. It took him, replaced him, then discarded the empty shell. But why do I still sense it? If it achieved its purpose, why does it linger? The sister knows. I saw her watching from an upstairs window as I left. Her expression was not one of grief, but of calculation. Her shadow moved before she did. I fear I have brought this upon myself by capturing the image, by making a doorway through my camera. The negative must be destroyed. All copies must be burned. Tonight I will return to Bailey's Beach with salt and the herbs Whittlesey recommended. I must close what I have opened. If anyone reads this, beware the photographs with wrong shadows. They are not errors, they are windows, and they allow things to look back at us, to find us." Emily closed the journal, her hands shaking. Outside her hotel window, night had fallen completely. The room suddenly felt too dark, the shadows in the corners too deep. She turned on every light, but still felt watched. She thought about what she had read, the ramblings of a man descending into paranoia and superstition, or something genuine, something that might explain the strange circumstances of Thomas's death and the disturbing anomalies in the photograph. And what about Margaret? Joseph Harrington had suspected she knew something, had perhaps even been complicit in whatever happened to Thomas. The note on the back of the photograph, "It's in the shadow, God forgive me," suggested guilt, knowledge. Emily took out her phone and pulled up the enhanced scan of the photograph she had made. Looking at it now, in a darkened hotel room after reading Joseph's journal, the wrongness of Thomas's shadow seemed even more pronounced. The tendril reaching toward Margaret seemed almost animated, as if at any moment it might continue its movement across the yellowed paper. And Margaret's own shadow. Emily hadn't paid much attention to it before, but now she noticed that it too seemed slightly off. Not as dramatically as Thomas's, but there was a subtle misalignment. A darkness that pooled around her feet in a way that didn't quite match the angle of the sun visible in the photograph. Emily's phone rang suddenly, making her jump. It was her mother. "Emily? Are you all right? I've been trying to reach you all day." "I'm fine, Mom. I'm in Newport doing some research on that photograph I mentioned." "Newport? Why would you go there?" Her mother's voice had an edge of panic. "Emily, I need you to listen to me. Stop looking into this. Come home." "Mom, what's wrong? Do you know something about Thomas's death?" A long silence. Then, "Not Thomas. Margaret, there are things you don't know about your grandmother." "What things?" "I can't tell you over the phone. Just come home, Emily. Now. Tonight." "Mom, you're scaring me. Just tell me what's going on." Her mother's voice dropped to a whisper. "She told me, Emily, on her deathbed, about what she did to Thomas." "About what she let in? She made me promise never to go to Newport, never to look at the old photographs. She said it was still there, still waiting, that it had been patient for decades, but wouldn't be patient forever." "What was still there?" Mom, you're not making sense. The shadow, Emily. The thing that took Thomas. Margaret didn't save him. She offered him to it. She was jealous. Always jealous of the attention he received. She made some kind of bargain with it. But she didn't understand the price. Emily's blood ran cold. What price? It marked her, attached itself to her shadow, just as it had to Thomas's. But it didn't take her right away. It waited, watched, fed on her fear and guilt for decades. She told me it spoke to her sometimes in the dark, promising that when it finally took her, it would need a new vessel, someone of her bloodline. Emily looked down at her own shadow, cast on the hotel room floor by the bedside lamp. For a moment, just a brief moment, she thought she saw it ripple, like heat rising from pavement. "I'm coming home," she said firmly. "I'll leave first thing in the morning." "No, now, Emily. Don't wait for morning." But Emily had already decided. Before she left Newport, she needed to speak with Robert Harrington once more. And she needed to return to Bailey's Beach, to the exact spot where the photograph was taken, to see if there was any truth to these stories of thin boundaries and entities crossing over. "I'll be careful, Mom, I promise. I'll call you in the morning." After hanging up, Emily tried to sleep, but every creak of the old hotel, every shift of shadow as cars passed outside, kept her wide awake. Around 3 a.m. she gave up and returned to her research, reviewing her notes and examining the photograph again. One detail from Joseph Harrington's journal kept returning to her mind. His meeting with old man Whittlesey, the Narragansett fisherman who had recognized something in the photograph. If such folklore had any basis in reality, perhaps there were still people in the area who knew the old stories, the old protections. As dawn broke, Emily had compiled a list of contacts, local historians, folklore specialists, and members of the Narragansett tribe who might be willing to speak with her. But first, she would meet Robert Harrington again, as planned. If you're still with us on this journey into the shadows, we appreciate your company in the dark. Take a moment to subscribe to Shadow Frames and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps us continue bringing these hidden stories to light. Emily arrived at Bailey's Beach earlier than arranged, hoping to explore the area in daylight before meeting Robert. The morning was overcast, the ocean gray and choppy under a sky heavy with the promise of rain. She found the spot where the Caldwell photograph had been taken and stood there, trying to imagine the scene as it had been in 1913. Joseph Harrington with his large box camera. The Caldwell family posed formally despite the casual setting. Young Thomas sitting at his mother's feet, unaware that he had only months to live. As Emily looked out at the water, she noticed something strange. Despite the choppy waves elsewhere, there was a circular area about 50 yards offshore where the water was perfectly still, as if something beneath the surface was calming the waves above it. "You see it too?" Emily turned to find Robert Harrington standing behind her, looking out at the same calm circle of water. "What is that?" she asked. "The locals call it the still spot. It moves up and down the coast, but it always comes back to this section of Bailey's Beach eventually." The Narragansett believed it was a doorway, not just for shadow entities, but for all manner of things not meant for our world. "And your grandfather? Did he believe that too?" Robert nodded. After the Caldwell photograph, he became obsessed with the still spot. He would come here at dawn and dusk, taking photographs, hoping to capture evidence of something crossing over. Did he ever succeed? Not in the way he hoped, but his photographs from that period, they're disturbing. Full of anomalies, lens flares that form faces, shadows that don't match their casters, strange distortions in the water. Emily held out Joseph's journal. "Thank you for letting me read this. It's illuminating, if terrifying." Robert took the journal but didn't pocket it. Instead, he handed Emily a small envelope. "I found this hidden in the binding when I first discovered the journal. I think you should have it." Inside the envelope was a small photograph, not the beach portrait but a different image entirely. It showed Margaret Caldwell, appearing to be in her late teens or early 20s, standing alone on what looked like a pier. The photograph was dated October 3rd, 1914, exactly 1 year after Thomas's death. At first glance, it was an unremarkable portrait, but as Emily studied it, she noticed what had probably compelled Joseph Harrington to hide it in his journal. Margaret's shadow on the wooden planks of the pier was wrong. It didn't match her pose, standing straight with hands clasped before her. Instead, the shadow's arms were outstretched, and there seemed to be the suggestion of something else within it, a second, smaller silhouette, as if a child were standing inside Margaret's shadow. "He took this a year after Thomas died," Robert explained. He had been watching the family, convinced that whatever had taken Thomas hadn't left. When he saw Margaret alone on the pier, he photographed her from a distance. Robert paused. "Look at her expression." Emily studied Margaret's face. Her great-grandmother was smiling, but it wasn't a natural smile. It was wide, stretching her face in a way that looked almost painful. And her eyes. They were open too wide, staring directly at the camera with an intensity that suggested she knew she was being photographed, despite Joseph presumably hiding his presence. She knew he was there, Emily whispered. Not she. Robert corrected grimly. It. My grandfather believed that by the time this photograph was taken, Margaret was already compromised, that the entity that had taken Thomas had attached itself to her, was gradually taking control. But Margaret lived a long life after this. She had children, grandchildren. She died just recently at 103. Robert nodded. That's what troubled my grandfather most. Why take Thomas quickly but remain with Margaret for decades? He came to believe these entities feed on different things. Some hunger for life, consuming it quickly like Thomas. Others feed on fear, on guilt, on the slow torment of a soul aware of its gradual possession. Emily thought of her mother's words. It marked her, attached itself to her shadow, just as it had to Thomas's, but it didn't take her right away. It waited, watched, fed on her fear and guilt for decades. And you? Emily asked. Do you believe all this? About shadow entities and possessions? Robert was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the still spot on the water. I've spent my life documenting strange phenomena along this coast. I've collected hundreds of accounts spanning 3 centuries. Disappearances, unexplained deaths, people who changed so dramatically that their own families didn't recognize them. I've seen photographs with shadow anomalies like the Caldwell image. So, yes, I believe something is here, something that has been crossing over and taking people for a very long time. He turned to Emily, his expression grave. But more importantly, I believe you're in danger. Your grandmother knew it. That's why she came back here 2 decades ago. She told me about you. Emily felt her heart skip a beat. What? Margaret spoke to you about me? She found me much as you did. We spoke right here on this beach. She was old then, frail, but there was a terrible clarity in her eyes. She said she could feel her time running out, that the thing that had been patient for so long was finally ready to claim her fully, and she was terrified about what would come next. What did she mean? These entities don't just disappear when their host dies. They need a new vessel. Margaret believed that it would seek out her bloodline once she was gone. She mentioned a granddaughter with an interest in history and photography. You, I presume. Emily felt suddenly cold despite the warm morning air. Why would it come for me specifically? Because you would be drawn to the photograph, to the mystery. You would investigate, look deeply into the image, open yourself to it. Robert gestured to the beach around them. And you would come here, to where the boundary is thinnest. Emily thought about how she had indeed been compelled to research the photograph, to come to Newport, to stand on this exact spot. Had she been drawn here, or had something been guiding her choices, preparing her? What did Margaret do when she came here 20 years ago? Was she looking for a way to break free of this thing? Robert's expression darkened. No, she came to make a bargain. She knew she couldn't escape what was coming for her, but she thought she could protect her family. She performed some kind of ritual right here at sunset. I watched from a distance, saw her draw symbols in the sand, place objects in a circle. She cut her palm, let her blood drip into the sand. Did it work, this ritual? I don't know, but afterward she seemed lighter, relieved. She told me she had bought time, that the entity had accepted her offer, but she warned that it wouldn't honor the bargain forever, that eventually it would seek a new Caldwell. Emily looked down at the photograph of Margaret on the pier, at the strange double shadow with its childlike silhouette. You think that's Thomas in her shadow? That somehow he remained with her? Or something wearing his shape? Robert said quietly. These entities are deceivers. They use familiar forms to manipulate, to gain trust. Emily noticed that the still spot on the water was expanding, the circle of unnatural calm growing wider. Dark clouds were gathering overhead, the wind picking up, carrying the scent of approaching rain. We should leave, Robert said urgently, eyeing the water. Storm's coming, and this isn't a safe place to be when the boundary thins. When does the boundary thin? At transitions. Dawn, dusk, during storms. The Narragansett knew this. They avoided this stretch of coast during such times. As they turned to leave, Emily's phone rang. It was her mother again. "Emily? Where are you?" "Still at the beach. I'm about to leave." "Listen to me," her mother interrupted, her voice tense. "I found something in Margaret's papers. A letter she wrote to be opened after her death. I've just read it." "What did it say?" "She made a deal, Emily. 20 years ago at Bailey's Beach. She offered herself fully to the entity in exchange for a promise that it would not seek out any of her descendants for 20 years. That time is up next week, on the anniversary of Thomas's death." Emily looked at Robert, who was watching the sky with growing concern. "Mom, I think I need to finish what Margaret started. I need to find a way to stop this thing permanently." "No. Emily, come home now. We'll figure this out together. I can't run from this." "If Margaret only bought time, then it will just keep coming. For you, for me, for any Caldwells that follow. It has to end." Before her mother could respond, a crack of lightning split the sky, striking the water directly in the center of the still spot. The sound of thunder was immediate and deafening. Emily's phone went dead. The air felt suddenly charged, heavy with electricity and something else. A presence, a watchfulness that made the hairs on her arms stand up. "We need to go now," Robert insisted, pulling at her arm. "It's not safe." But Emily stood transfixed, staring at the water. The still spot was glowing now, a faint blue phosphorescence outlining the perfect circle of calm amid the increasingly rough sea. "It's opening," she whispered. Robert followed her gaze and cursed under his breath. "Not opening. Something's coming through." As they watched, the center of the still spot began to darken, as if ink were spreading through the water from below. The darkness took shape, first formless, then resolving into what looked like a human silhouette standing on the surface of the water. It was too distant to make out clearly, but Emily could see that it was roughly the size of a child. "Thomas?" she whispered. The figure began moving toward shore, not swimming but walking on the surface of the water, its movements jerky and unnatural. "That's not Thomas," Robert said, his voice shaking. "We need to run. Now." This time, Emily didn't resist. They turned and ran from the beach, the wind howling around them as the storm intensified. As they reached Robert's car in the parking lot, Emily looked back. The dark figure had reached the shore and was standing on the sand, still too distant to see clearly. But it was raising an arm, pointing directly at her. If you're brave enough to continue this journey with us, make sure you're subscribed to Shadow Frames. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and join our community of shadow seekers. Robert drove Emily back to her hotel, both of them silent, processing what they had witnessed on the beach. The storm was following them, lightning cracking across the sky in patterns that seemed too deliberate to be natural. "What do we do now?" Emily asked as they pulled into the hotel parking lot. Robert handed her a business card. "This is Abraham Whittlesey, Old Man Whittlesey's great-grandson. He keeps the old knowledge, the old protections. If anyone knows how to fight this thing, it's him." He paused. "I'd go with you, but what?" "I've spent too long researching these entities, looking at photographs with shadow anomalies. I'm already marked. I feel it watching me, especially at night. I can't risk getting any closer to this thing than I already am." Emily understood. "Thank you for everything, Robert. I'll contact Whittlesey right away." Inside her hotel room, Emily called the number on the card. A gruff voice answered on the third ring. "Whittlesey. Mr. Whittlesey, my name is Emily Caldwell. Robert Harrington gave me your number. I need your help with a shadow entity." A long pause. "Caldwell. Any relation to the Caldwells from the 1913 beach photograph?" Emily's breath caught. "Yes. Margaret Caldwell was my grandmother." Another pause. "Come to my shop, 237 Thames Street. Now, don't bring the photograph, and stay in the light." Emily took a taxi to Thames Street, the historic district of Newport. The storm was worsening, the narrow colonial-era streets already beginning to flood. She found Whittlesey's shop wedged between a trendy boutique and a coffee shop, a small storefront with darkened windows and a weathered sign reading "Whittlesey's Maritime Antiquities." The door was unlocked. Inside, the shop was cluttered with nautical artifacts, ship's wheels, compasses, weathered maps in glass frames. The air smelled of sea salt, old paper, and something else, herbs or incense. Abraham Whittlesey stood behind a glass counter, a tall, lean man in his 60s with the same weathered look as Robert Harrington, though his ancestry was clearly Native American. His long gray hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and he wore a simple flannel shirt and jeans. "You shouldn't have come to Newport," he said without preamble. "You've accelerated things. I needed answers." Emily replied. About Thomas, about Margaret, about what happened. Whittlesey nodded, his expression grim. And now you've opened yourself to it. Let me see your shadow. My shadow? Stand there by the wall. Let the light from the window cast your shadow clearly. Emily did as instructed, standing so that the storefront window cast her shadow on the bare wall. Whittlesey studied it intently, then nodded. It's begun, but it's still early. The attachment is minimal. Attachment? You mean? The entity has found you, marked you, but hasn't fully attached itself to your shadow yet. There's still time to break the connection. Emily felt sick. How do I do that? Whittlesey moved to a back room and returned with a small wooden box. My great-grandfather gave this to Joseph Harrington in 1913, after the photographer showed him the Caldwell photograph. Harrington tried to use it to save the boy, but he was too late. He opened the box. Inside was a small leather pouch, a vial of what looked like salt, and a tarnished silver mirror. These are the old protections. The pouch contains herbs gathered at specific times and places along this coast. The salt is from the tears of whales collected by my ancestors. And the mirror, he picked it up carefully. The mirror is for seeing the entity's true form, not the shapes it wears to deceive. What do I do with these? Emily asked. You must confront the entity at the place where it crossed over, the still spot. You must go at sunset when the boundary is thinnest. You create a circle with the salt, stand within it, and use the herbs to cleanse your shadow. And the mirror, hold it so that it reflects both you and your shadow. If the entity has begun to manifest within your shadow, you'll see its true form in the mirror. Speak its name and you can command it. Its name? How would I know that? Whittlesey's expression darkened. Your grandmother knew. It would have told her during their years together. You need to find that name before sunset. Emily thought about the beach photograph, about Margaret's note on the back. It's in the shadow. God forgive me. Could the name be hidden somewhere in the photograph itself? I need to go back to my hotel, she said. I need to examine the photograph again. Whittlesey nodded. Be careful. The closer you get to discovering its name, the more aggressive it will become. It won't want to be bound or banished. As Emily left the shop, the storm had intensified, turning the streets into small rivers. She managed to flag down a taxi and returned to her hotel, soaked and shivering despite the summer heat. In her room, she laid out the beach photograph on the desk and studied it again under the bright desk lamp. Margaret's note had said, "It's in the shadow," but she had examined Thomas's shadow extensively and found nothing that looked like a name or word. Unless... Emily opened her laptop and pulled up the high-resolution scan she had made. She zoomed in on Margaret's shadow this time, not Thomas's. At first she saw nothing unusual, just the expected silhouette of a teenage girl standing beside her father. But as she increased the magnification further, focusing on the area where Margaret's shadow fell across the sand, she noticed something. Tiny marks in the shadow, almost like letters scratched in the sand but captured only in the shadow itself, not in the actual beach around it. Emily enhanced the contrast, sharpened the image, trying to make the marks more legible. Slowly they resolved into what appeared to be a word written in an alphabet she didn't recognize. Angular symbols that reminded her of both Norse runes and some Native American writing systems. She took a picture of the strange word with her phone and texted it to Whittlesey with the message, "Found this in Margaret's shadow. Is this its name?" His response came quickly. "Where did you find this?" "In Margaret's shadow in the beach photograph, not Thomas's." A long pause, then, "It was in her already, even in 1913. Be careful. Don't speak these symbols aloud unless you're within the salt circle. Come back to my shop now." As Emily was gathering her things, the power in the hotel went out. Her room was plunged into near darkness, the only illumination coming from her laptop screen and the occasional flash of lightning through the window. In that blue-white strobe of lightning, Emily saw something that made her blood freeze. Her shadow on the wall, cast by the light of her laptop, wasn't moving with her. It remained still, even as she jerked back in fear, and it was changing shape, elongating, developing what appeared to be additional limbs that stretched across the wall. Emily grabbed her phone and the wooden box Whittlesey had given her, then ran from the room. The hotel hallway was dark, emergency lights providing minimal illumination. She took the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator, racing down 6 flights to the lobby. Outside, the storm had reached unnatural proportions. The wind was howling, bending trees and sending debris flying through the streets. The rain fell in sheets so heavy they obscured everything beyond a few feet. Emily tried to call a taxi, but there were none available in the storm. She would have to walk to Whittlesey's shop, about a mile away through the flooded streets of Newport. She began walking, keeping to the middle of the street where the streetlights provided the best illumination. The wind tore at her clothes, the rain soaking her within seconds. But worse than the physical discomfort was the sense of being followed, of eyes watching her from every shadow cast by the storm-tossed trees and buildings. Halfway to Whittlesey's shop, Emily realized she was being herded. Every time she tried to turn onto a well-lit main street, the wind would intensify to near hurricane force, driving her back. Instead, she found herself being pushed toward darker side streets, toward the harbor, toward the sea. With growing horror, she realized she was being driven back to Bailey's Beach, to the still spot, to the entity that had emerged from the water earlier that day. We're approaching the climax of our tale, Shadow Seekers. If you've made it this far with us, make sure you're subscribed to Shadow Frames for more stories from the darkness. Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Your presence gives us strength as we face what waits in the shadows. Emily tried to resist the unnatural wind, but it was too strong. She found herself being pushed inexorably toward the beach, her feet slipping on the flooded cobblestones of Newport's historic district. As she struggled, her phone rang. Whittlesey calling back. "Where are you?" he shouted over the storm. "It's forcing me toward the beach," Emily cried. "The wind, it's not natural. Listen carefully." Whittlesey's voice crackled through the phone. "You need to use the protections now, before you reach the beach. Find shelter, somewhere with walls to block the wind. Make the salt circle and cleanse your shadow with the herbs. And the name, the symbols? Speak them only as a last resort. The name is a binding, but also an invitation. If you're not prepared, speaking it could complete the connection rather than sever it." The call cut off abruptly. Emily looked around desperately for shelter and spotted a small boathouse near the harbor. Fighting against the wind, she changed direction, forcing her way toward the wooden structure. Inside the boathouse, the sound of the storm was slightly muffled, though rain pounded on the roof like 1,000 drumming fingers. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, swaying in the draft, casting wild, moving shadows across the walls. Emily quickly removed the vial of salt from the wooden box and poured it in a circle around herself on the wooden floor. She opened the leather pouch, releasing the scent of unfamiliar herbs, sharp, medicinal, ancient. Following instinct, she crumbled some of the dried herbs between her fingers and sprinkled them over her shadow, cast long and distorted on the boathouse wall by the swinging light bulb. "I cleanse this shadow," she whispered, the words coming to her from some deep place of knowing. "I reclaim it as my own. No entity may attach to it. No spirit may inhabit it." As the herb dust settled on her shadow, Emily thought she saw it ripple, as if something within it was in pain or anger. The light bulb swung more violently, though there was no draft strong enough to cause such movement. Emily took out the tarnished silver mirror and held it up, angling it to capture both herself and her shadow on the wall. At first, she saw only what she expected, her own reflection and the dark silhouette behind her. But as she stared into the mirror, the image began to change. Her reflection remained the same, but her shadow transformed. Instead of a flat silhouette, it appeared three-dimensional in the mirror, with depth and substance. And within that depth, she could see something moving, a figure that was not her own. It was small, child-sized, but wrong in countless subtle ways. Its proportions were slightly off, its movements jerky and unnatural. As she watched, it turned within the shadow to face the mirror directly, and Emily saw its face. Not Thomas's face as she had half expected, but something that only approximated human features, as if designed by something that had only a vague understanding of how humans should look. Its eyes were empty sockets, its mouth a too-wide gash that opened to reveal nothing but darkness within, and it was smiling at her. Emily nearly dropped the mirror in shock, but forced herself to keep holding it steady. The entity in her shadow was fully visible now, no longer trying to hide its presence. It pressed against the inside of her shadow as if testing a membrane, searching for weakness. "Who are you?" Emily demanded, her voice shaking. "What do you want?" The entity's mouth moved, but no sound emerged. Instead, Emily heard a voice in her mind, a whisper like sand shifting, like pages turning, like the distant sound of waves. "You know who I am, Emily Caldwell. I have been with your family for generations. I took Thomas when he welcomed me in his childish curiosity. I dwelled within Margaret for decades, feeding on her guilt and fear, and now I have come for you. Why? Why our family? Because Margaret offered you to me. In exchange for time, 20 years of peace, she promised me her granddaughter, the one who would seek the truth, who would come to the water's edge. You. Emily felt sick. Had her grandmother truly sacrificed her to this entity? I don't believe you. Margaret left warnings, tried to protect her family. The entity's smile widened impossibly. Did she? Or did she simply ensure you would be curious enough to seek me out? To come to Newport? To find the photograph? To stand where the boundary is thin? Margaret played her role perfectly. Emily's mind raced. Could it be true? Had all of this, finding the photograph, discovering the police records, meeting Robert Harrington, learning about the shadow entities, been part of an elaborate lure? Had she been manipulated into coming to Newport, into opening herself to this entity? No, she refused to believe it. Margaret's note on the photograph, "It's in the shadow. God forgive me," had been a confession, but also a clue. She had hidden the entity's name where Emily would eventually find it, giving her the tool she needed to fight back. "I know your name," Emily said, her voice stronger now. "I found it in Margaret's shadow." The entity's expression changed, the empty eye sockets narrowing. "Names have power only when properly used. Do you think you can bind me with a few symbols you cannot even pronounce?" "Let's find out," Emily replied. She pulled out her phone, brought up the image of the strange angular symbols she had found in Margaret's shadow on the photograph. As Emily prepared to speak the symbols, the boathouse door burst open, blown inward by a gust of wind so powerful it tore the hinges from the wood. The salt circle around her feet scattered, broken by the force of the intruding storm. The bare light bulb shattered, plunging the boathouse into darkness, broken only by flashes of lightning. In those strobe-like bursts of illumination, Emily saw her shadow separate from her, peeling away from her feet to spread across the wall like spilled ink. The silver mirror in her hand grew suddenly cold, so cold it burned. She dropped it with a cry of pain, and it shattered on the wooden floor, fragments scattering like ice. "Too late," came the whispered voice in her mind. "The boundary is open. The still spot calls. Come to the water, Emily Caldwell. Complete what began in 1913. Emily felt herself being pulled toward the broken door, toward the raging storm outside, toward the beach beyond. Her feet moved against her will, as if her body was being controlled by puppet strings. With tremendous effort, Emily reached into the leather pouch and grabbed a handful of the herbs. As another flash of lightning illuminated the boathouse, she saw her shadow on the wall, no longer attached to her but moving independently, taking the shape of the entity she had seen in the mirror. She flung the herbs directly at the shadow, crying out the symbols from her phone screen, pronouncing them as best she could. The strange angular letters seemed to burn in her mind as she spoke them, each one feeling like a key turning in a lock. "Ixathla noctu mordigian." The shadow on the wall contorted, twisting in what appeared to be pain. The pulling sensation on Emily's body ceased abruptly, and she staggered, suddenly free of the entity's control. But the shadow wasn't defeated. It writhed on the wall, changing shape, growing larger. The herbs Emily had thrown seemed to be burning within it, small points of light in the darkness. The entity was in pain, but also angry, and now fully revealed, no longer hiding its presence or nature. Emily knew she needed to complete the binding, to finish what Margaret had started 20 years ago with her blood ritual on the beach. But how? The salt circle was broken, the mirror shattered, and the storm was worsening, the wind threatening to tear the boathouse apart around her. In desperation, she looked at the wooden box Whittlesey had given her. There had to be something else, some final protection or weapon against the entity. At the bottom of the box, beneath where the pouch, vial, and mirror had been, was a small silver knife with strange symbols etched into the blade, similar to the symbols that formed the entity's name. Emily understood. Blood had power. Margaret had used her blood in her ritual on the beach, not to protect her family as Emily had assumed, but to make a bargain, to buy time. Could Emily use her blood not to bargain, but to banish? With the silver knife in hand, Emily faced the writhing shadow on the wall. "I am Emily Caldwell," she declared, her voice strong despite her fear. "Granddaughter of Margaret, great-niece of Thomas. I reclaim my family's shadow." She drew the knife across her palm, not deeply, but enough to draw blood. As it welled up, She pressed her bleeding hand directly against the shadow on the wall. By blood and by name I bind you, Ixathla Noctu Mordigian. No more Caldwells will be taken. No more shadows will be stolen. The shadow beneath her bleeding hand shuddered. The entity's voice screamed in her mind, a sound of ancient rage and frustration. The wall beneath her palm grew cold, then hot, the wood seeming to shift and move as if something was trying to push through from the other side. Emily maintained her pressure, continuing the impromptu ritual. Return to your realm. The doorway is closed. The still spot is sealed. Outside, the storm reached a fever pitch. Lightning struck somewhere very close, the thunder immediate and deafening. The boathouse shook with the force of it, and then, abruptly, everything stopped. The wind died. The rain ceased. The shadow beneath Emily's hand faded to an ordinary darkness, just the absence of light with no depth or substance. Emily stepped back, breathing hard. Her cut palm stung, blood dripping onto the wooden floor. She felt lightheaded, drained, but also oddly peaceful. Had it worked? Had she banished the entity? She made her way outside on shaky legs. The storm had passed as suddenly as it had begun, leaving the harbor eerily calm. The sky was clearing, stars beginning to appear in patches between the dissipating clouds. Emily looked toward Bailey's beach, toward where the still spot had been. From this distance, she couldn't see the water clearly, but she felt no pull, no compulsion to go there. The connection was broken. Her phone rang. Robert Harrington. Emily, are you all right? The storm just stopped. I think it's over, she said, her voice hoarse. I found its name in Margaret's shadow, just as she intended. I used it, along with my blood. I think I sent it back. Where are you? I'll come get you. By the harbor, near the old boathouses. Stay there. And Emily, stay in the light, just to be safe. We're nearing the end of our journey through the shadows. If you've followed this twisted tale with us, we're grateful for your company. Take a moment to subscribe to Shadow Frames if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything to us. Epilogue. 2 weeks later, Emily sat in her apartment in Boston, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, casting ordinary, expected shadows across her floor. She had returned from Newport the day after the confrontation, after being checked over by a doctor for the cut on her palm, which she explained as an accident with a broken glass. Robert Harrington and Abraham Whittlesey had both insisted she leave Newport immediately, not risking another night so close to Bailey's beach and the still spot. She had complied, eager to put distance between herself and the sight of so much strangeness. In the 2 weeks since, she had tried to process what had happened, to make sense of the experience. Had she truly encountered a supernatural entity that had been haunting her family for generations? Or had she been caught up in a storm of coincidences, family secrets, and suggestion that had led to a kind of shared delusion? The rational part of her mind suggested the latter. Storm-induced hysteria, combined with the disturbing details of Thomas's death and her own exhaustion from days of research. The mind was capable of creating powerful experiences when primed by suggestion and fear. And yet, the beach photograph sat on her desk, now in a new protective sleeve. Emily had examined it countless times since returning to Boston, looking for any changes, any sign that what had happened in Newport had altered it in some way. Thomas's shadow still showed its strange anomaly, the misalignment, the reaching tendril toward Margaret, and Margaret's shadow still contained the barely visible angular symbols that formed the entity's name. Nothing had changed in the photograph itself, but Emily's relationship to it had transformed completely. She no longer felt drawn to it, compelled to study it obsessively. It was simply an old family photograph now, a sad reminder of a boy who had died too young and the sister who had carried the weight of that tragedy for nearly a century. Emily's research had continued, but with a different focus. She was now documenting similar cases throughout history, mysterious deaths associated with photographic anomalies, particularly shadow distortions. Robert Harrington had put her in touch with other researchers, forming a loose network of people studying what they called thin places, locations where boundaries between worlds seemed more permeable. She had spoken with her mother at length about Margaret's final years, about the things she had said on her deathbed. There were still unanswered questions. Had Margaret truly sacrificed Emily to save herself as the entity had claimed? Or had she been trying in her own way to provide Emily with the knowledge she would need to end the cycle permanently? Emily preferred to believe the latter. The note on the photograph, "It's in the shadow. God forgive me," suggested remorse, an attempt at atonement. Margaret had hidden the entity's name where Emily would eventually find it, giving her the weapon she needed. As the afternoon light began to fade, Emily rose to turn on a lamp. Her shadow stretched across the floor, behaving exactly as a shadow should, moving in perfect synchronization with her body. Still, as twilight approached, Emily found herself turning on every light in her apartment, banishing the dark corners, the deep shadows. Some habits, she had discovered, were hard to break. Her phone chimed with a text message from Robert Harrington. "Stillspot has not reappeared. I think you succeeded where others failed. The doorway is closed." Emily smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. Whether the events in Newport had been supernatural or psychological, the outcome was the same. A family curse, literal or metaphorical, had been broken. She picked up the beach photograph one last time, studying the faces of the Caldwell family, Henry, Eleanor, Margaret, and Thomas, frozen in that moment from 1913, just months before tragedy would strike. Tomorrow she would place it in a proper archival storage box and file it away with the rest of her family history materials. But tonight, as darkness fell outside her windows, Emily found herself turning the photograph over and adding her own message beneath Margaret's faded pencil note. "The shadow is reclaimed. The circle is closed. E.C. Thank you for joining us on Shadow Frames for this journey into the darkness of the Caldwell family mystery. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel for more tales from the shadows, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love to hear from our shadow seekers around the world. Until next time, remember to check your shadows carefully. Some of them might be watching you back.